welcome back to another video. As you can see today, we are doing another pen and paper writing video. What are we talking about today? Well, I'm sure you've read the title and you've seen it. So today, I want to talk about dream vacations, or maybe just bucket list vacations, or something to that extent. These are places that I have not visited and that I would like to visit someday, that I plan on visiting, etc. Now, some of these are a group of multiple places, and then some of them are just individual cities or countries that I would like to visit. So starting off, I'm going to start close to home. I'm going to call this one A Journey East. Now, I live on the west coast of the United States. The furthest east I have ever been in my entire life is Oklahoma. And I've been further, I've been up and down the west coast. Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California, Nevada, Arizona. I've been into Mexico. I've been up to Canada. But I've never been to the east coast of the United States. I've never experienced that culture. I've never experienced that part of the country that was settled first, that has more historical buildings, things of that nature. So for this, my idea for this trip would be a road trip where I'd be stopping for a few days to a week or so in each of these cities. Probably this whole thing would take place over the course of a month, doing this road trip. But the point would be to stop and spend considerable time first in Chicago, or Chicago. I've always been fascinated with the city of Chicago in general. The architecture there, the whole Windy City vibe, the way they do things. Just something about the city of Chicago just fascinates me. I'd love to go and, over the course of my trip, see a Bears game, see a Bulls game, see a Blackhawks game. The sports culture in that city is fantastic. Great food, amazing architecture, and I think Chicago gets a lot of a bad rep. Maybe just this is my personal anecdotes, but some of the people I grew up around had some very backwards ideas about Chicago, and it made me look into what it's actually like there and see the cool buildings and the cool culture there, and it made me really want to visit the city. Stop 2 on this road trip would be Boston, Massachusetts. Massachusetts in general, I think, is really underrated as far as a beautiful state goes. I think there's some beautiful scenery, beautiful flora and fauna, and the history of the city, everything surrounding the city. I'd love to go visit the JFK Museum, or the JFK Library, rather, excuse me, and just take in the atmosphere of being in Boston. And then finally, to finish off the East Coast road trip, of course, probably the staple of the East Coast of the United States. New York, the Big Apple, the most populous city in the U.S., the center of global commerce. You have the stock market. I mean, for me, the big reason I'd be going to New York, not even gonna lie, pizza and bagels. Every day I'd be getting pizza, bagels, chopped cheese, just trying those New York staples, riding the subway. I've never been on a subway train in my entire life. Going to a Knicks game, just taking in that New York culture, being around that hustle and bustle, and yeah, I've always wanted to go to New York. Like I said, never been to the East Coast, so this would be my East Coast road trip of the United States. Next up, we'll have what I'll call a month in Japan. Because, well, basically, my goal is to spend a month in Japan on this trip. I've always, for the longest time, I have wanted to go to Japan. It's been a bucket list vacation for me since I was 13, 14 years old. I've just always been fascinated with Japanese culture, history, art, pop culture, etc. So obviously, where you land when you fly into Japan internationally, Tokyo, obviously the biggest city in Japan, the center of Japanese commerce, the culture, everything, it all's taking place there in Japan. Some of the best restaurants in the entire world there in Japan. Seeing Shinjuku going, and let's be honest, I'd be spending a ton of time in Akihabara, the Electric City, going to the arcades, going to manga shops, anime shops, going to the Pokemon Center there in Tokyo, going to the Gundam Dock, experiencing some of the various cafes that they have there in Tokyo, just taking in that full tourist experience that they have there. Going to see the swallows in person, Tokyo. I could spend a month just in Tokyo and not be satisfied by the time I have to go home, right? Tokyo is, yeah. Just, I don't think I need to really explain much more. Everyone knows the appeal there. I think my next stop on this trip, though, would be of Japan before they moved their capital to Tokyo. Kyoto is a bit more old school, less hustle and bustle. It's a bit quieter. The people who live in Kyoto tend to be a bit older, more traditional minded. There's a lot of older architecture. You have a lot of temples there. You have a lot of nature integration with the city and things like that. There's palaces. So Tokyo would be the go, 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 doing things, being a tourist, and then spending a little bit of time, a week or two in Kyoto. That's your wind down. Connect with the nature of the area, connect with the culture of the area. Be a little bit less materialistic, be a little bit less high energy, and just calm down. Same thing goes for the next and last spot I'd want to visit in Japan, although nowadays this is a bit more touristy as well, but Nara, that would just be to see the deer, feed the deer, interact with them, just because I think, personally, that's so cool and unique. Alright, next up we have, I'm not sure really what to call this trip, but I guess I would call it, two countries in Europe. That's what I'll call this little trip that I would be taking. See, for me, the places I want to go in Europe, I don't really have an interest in Paris. I don't really have an interest in like Barcelona, Madrid, Rome. Like, I don't really care for those places, to be honest. Like, it would be cool to go, obviously. I wouldn't say no. But if I have a bucket list and I feel like there's only so many places I'll be able to go before I die, those ones aren't at the top of my list. But if I am doing a European vacation though, where do I want to go? Well, let's start that off. We're gonna land in Prague. We're landing in Prague. I'm not sure if it's the capital or if it's just the biggest city in Czechia. But it is a beautiful, beautiful city. And there's like amazing Gothic architecture. It's one of the cheaper cities in Europe as a tourist, but it's also usually not as packed with other tourists because, like I said, it's not Paris, it's not Rome, it's not Florence. It's a little bit more under the radar. So it's a little bit more laid-back vibe there in Prague. And the big thing for me, like I said, is taking in the culture, the history, and the architecture. There are some gorgeous Gothic buildings around Prague that are just absolutely breathtaking. They're the sorts of things that you can make your wallpaper on your computer. But from Prague, we would then hop a train and go to Berlin. Berlin, particularly, it's the biggest city in Germany. Honestly, in Europe, Germany is really the most interesting country to me. If I could live anywhere in Europe, I would probably choose to live in Germany. And German food, getting some schnitzel, getting, what's it called? I can't think of it off the top of my head. It'll come to me as soon as I stop recording, but just all the amazing food, the beer in Germany, and I just feel like the German history and culture is very interesting to me. And the people seem very sort of like, I'm not trying to put it exactly, but it feels like the people are sort of nice and cordial, but not like in an overly fake or friendly way. And then finally, we'd finish off our trip in Munich. Munich and Bavaria in general has a far different culture and vibe than the rest of Germany. The architecture's different, the language is different, the people are different, the politics are different, everything's just a little bit different in Bavaria. And Munich is like the heart of Bavaria, as far as I understand it. That's where your big Oktoberfest is, which I'd love to go to. Also, as a fan of Bayern Munich, I would love to go to the Allianz Arena and watch a game in person for the first time there, and to take in that atmosphere, the game, all of that. I think that would be amazing. And finally, this is kind of the last named trip that I have before we just get into random places I want to visit. But I'll call this one Return to the Motherland. That's what we'll call this one. Although funny enough, it's my father's side of the family that's from Norway. But this would be my trip to Norway. And we have these big trips here. I'm thinking this is like 2 weeks plus a month, preferably if I can swing it. These aren't, go there for 4 or 5 days a week. This is 2 weeks minimum or more for these named trips that I've come up with. Return to the Motherland. My great-grandfather moved to the U.S. from Norway. My grandma is really into ancestry. She dug through our family history, found out where he was born, where he died, when he came over to the United States, all this stuff, and I've always been fascinated by it. I've always felt a connection to that part of my history, and I would love to go in person to Norway and experience the culture, the place, the beautiful, beautiful scenery. If you've seen any of my GeoGuessr videos, when I get Norway, it's unlike anything. It's like a fantasy landscape. It's gorgeous, in my opinion. Obviously, limited exposure, but I think it's the most beautiful place as far as natural beauty is concerned in the entire world. And there's some days where I question why my great-grandfather came to the United States all those years ago, when I look at how Norway is now. Although I understand that the Norway of yesteryear is not the Norway of today. And I unfortunately am too far removed to get citizenship there, so I actually do kind of live with this fear that if I, one day when I do go visit Norway, I might absolutely fall in love with it there and sort of feel spiritually connected to the land there, but I won't be able to actually live there legally, which is actually a very upsetting thought to me. What's doubly upsetting is I found out that they offer a college program where people from the US can go and take college classes there in Norway. And it's fully taught in English, and there's actually paths to citizenship through that program. But I didn't know about this at the time of me being, applying for college, and I'm too old now to apply for the program. That was very upsetting to learn about. But anyway, this trip would start with touching down in Oslo. Oslo is the biggest city in Norway. It is the main city in Norway. That's where all of your culture, everything is theirs in Oslo. Then from Oslo we would go to Bergen. Bergen is of the larger cities in Norway. From what I've seen, it is the most beautiful. It's the one closest to nature of like the major cities, kind of closest to Oslo, where you land in at, where you're not trekking way up north, or it's maybe a bit more treacherous of a journey. But Bergen, absolutely beautiful place, gorgeous area, lots of natural beauty around that whole area. And finally, for this trip, it would end where my family's story begins. Skien, Norway is where my great-grandfather was born. It's where he worked as a fisherman before he came over to the United States. As I understand it, it's a small fishing village. There's not much there, not much to see, not much to do. Most people are trying to get out of there. There's only basically one famous person of note who was ever born in Skien, and he is known for a poem or a fictional work that's basically lamenting living there. So a bit of a depressing place, definitely small, not the sort of place like Oslo or Bergen, but I want to see where my family came from, see if maybe I can see some grave sites or something, and see if I get that connection to where my ancestors lived. So these are the named trips. These are the big ones I want to make sure I do someday. But there's also some random places I would just like to see, like to experience. Nothing big and planned here. Just maybe one-off trips. Maybe these would be shorter trips, just 1 week or so in these spots. These random locations would be Seoul, South Korea, right? South Korea has sort of become a culturally dominant country in recent years. You have K-pop, and then you have K-dramas, which are now like really catching on in the United States. If you've looked at Netflix recently, you've seen that there's a ton of K-dramas on Netflix. And of course, we have shows like Squid Game, movies like Parasite, and Korea has really become a culturally significant country globally. And I would love to go to Seoul and experience that firsthand. Maybe go to some K-pop shows in person. I think that'd be very interesting. Next up, I've got to put a little thing. Bangkok, Thailand. Bangkok, Thailand is one of, if not the cheapest, major city in all of Southeast Asia to visit. It is extremely affordable for tourists, and it's not like you're sacrificing quality for that lower price point. You can do a lot of very fun and exciting things, stay in a nice accommodation, stay in a nice part of the city, and not spend very much money. There's a video on YouTube I watched of a guy who was getting by in Bangkok on $20 a day, and that included him eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He got a beer with dinner, and he was doing entertainment things too. He was going to a go-kart track, and it was like $2 for like a race around the go-kart track. If you've been go-karting in the US recently, you know it is a lot more than $2 to go. So Bangkok, for me, there's no one specific thing about Bangkok that calls to me. It's just that I really do want to spend time journeying and exploring through different parts of Southeast Asia, and Bangkok is a great starting off point for that because it is so cheap. Next up, Lisbon, Portugal. Kind of similar to Bangkok for similar reasons. Lisbon is like one of, if not the cheapest major European city, at least Western European city, for travelers from abroad. It's not as popular as some of the bigger European cities like a Paris, a London, a Rome. Not as many people go to Portugal or think about Portugal. Portugal has beautiful weather, amazing culture, amazing food, and I would love to just spend some time in Lisbon. I've heard it has a very laid-back atmosphere, and it's very tourist-friendly. And finally, you're going to have to forgive my spelling on this one. I think I got that correct. Reykjavik, Iceland. I'm not really sure. I don't have any specific reason for this one really, but I've always just sort of thought that Iceland seems pretty cool. I have some friends who went on a trip to Iceland a few years back. They were posting pictures, they were telling me about it, and they loved their time there. They actually were snow camping their entire trip. They were backpacking with tents and stuff and camping the entirety of their trip. And that sounds like a very interesting way to do it. I think I might like to try that myself. The only thing is Reykjavik is one of the most expensive spots like in the whole world to visit. Iceland in general is extremely expensive because it's so small and isolated. But anyways, that is my list. Those are the places that are at the top of my bucket list to visit someday. I hope you found this interesting. I would love to hear from you guys, the places that are on your dream vacation list. Maybe I gave you some ideas that you had never considered before, that maybe you will want to do in the future for your own trips. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below. If you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this almost every single day. Until next time, guys. Bye bye.